Gandhi is often remembered as a saint, a symbol, a statue standing still in history. But before all of that, he was simply a man learning how to be gentle in a world that had forgotten gentleness. He did not raise his voice. He did not lift a weapon. He simply stood unshaken. So we ask, softly, how does one quiet voice confront an empire that echoes with guns? The child who feared violence. Before he was the Mahatma, before crowds followed his footsteps and empires trembled at the whisper of his name, he was simply a child. A small, slender, quiet boy born in the seaside town of Porbandar, where the air smelled of salt and incense, and the days moved slowly, like pages turning in a gentle book. His name was Mohandas. He was not loud. He was not fearless. He was not the kind of child who commanded attention. He was the kind of child who felt. He felt everything deeply, not just his own joys and sorrows, but those of others. If another child cried, his heart tightened, as though the pain had passed through the air and settled in his chest. If his mother looked worried, he carried that worry for hours, turning it over in silence like a delicate stone. He did not yet have words for this tenderness, only the ache of it. This sensitivity made him shy. He avoided fights, not because he feared losing, but because conflict itself wounded him. Loud voices felt like storms. Raised hands felt like thunder. Anger, even when not aimed at him, was something he could not bear to watch. One afternoon, when he was very young, he saw a group of older boys kicking a stray dog in the street. They laughed as the animal whimpered, dust rising around them like a cruel mist. Most children his age would have run away or joined in the spectacle. But Mohandas walked forward slowly, his small hands trembling. He did not shout. He did not strike. He simply placed himself between the dog and the boys, shivering like a candle flame in the wind. The boys mocked him. They pushed him aside. They did not understand. But the dog understood. It crawled to him, pressed its face against his knee, as though recognizing a gentle soul in a world that often forgets gentleness. Later that evening, as the oil lamp flickered beside his mother, Putlabai, he asked her softly, "Why do people hurt others?" His voice was not angry, just wounded. His mother did not speak right away. She looked at him with a quiet knowing, the kind of knowing passed down through generations of souls who have loved more than they understood. Finally, she answered, "My son, some hearts are hard because they are afraid. They do not know how to feel. But you must not let your heart become like that. To feel is to be alive." He held her words without fully understanding them, but something in him settled, not like a decision, more like a seed being planted. At school, Mohandas was nervous. He walked softly, as if not to disturb the world. He did not fight, did not shout, did not try to prove himself. And because the world often celebrates noise more than quiet, some called him weak. But weakness is not always what it seems. When another boy was punished harshly in front of the class, Mohandas looked away, not out of indifference, but because the boy's pain struck him like a blow to his own chest. He could not ignore suffering. He could not look at it and remain untouched. This, though he did not yet know it, was the beginning of his philosophy. Compassion is not born from strength. It is born from vulnerability. Only those who have been wounded understand how terrible it is to wound another. His mother taught him stories of saints and sages, men who tamed their tempers, who mastered themselves before they sought to change the world. In these stories, the greatest power was not domination, but restraint. She spoke of ahimsa non-harm, not as a rule, but as a way of being. Ahimsa was not softness. It was courage of the heart, the courage to feel instead of numb, the courage to care when it is easier to turn away, the courage to refuse violence, even when violence is all the world has ever known. But sensitivity is not an easy gift. It can feel like being made of glass in a world of stones. There were days when Mohandas wished he could be harder, sharper, less affected. He tried to imitate the boys who shouted, who strutted, who seemed unbreakable. But cruelty felt like a betrayal of something sacred in him. Whenever he acted with harshness, he felt a kind of sorrow settle over him like dusk over the sea. So he learned, slowly, quietly, that his softness was not a flaw to cure. It was a truth to protect. Years later, people would say, Gandhi was nonviolent because he was strong. But the truth is gentler. He was nonviolent because he was sensitive, because he knew what pain felt like, and he could not bear to pass it on. The seed of nonviolence was planted not in victory, not in ideology, but in empathy. A heart that aches cannot choose cruelty. A heart that sees suffering cannot pretend it has no cost. A heart that feels is capable of something extraordinary, choosing peace when violence would be easier. At the edge of childhood, as sunlight fell across the sea, the boy stood alone for a moment, watching waves roll softly onto the shore. He did not know the weight his future would hold. He did not know that thousands would one day walk behind him. He did not know that empires would tremble at his footsteps, or that his silence would one day speak louder than armies. He only knew this. To hurt another felt like hurting himself. And from that quiet truth, from that fragile, trembling awareness, a revolution would someday be born. The awakening in South Africa. Before South Africa, Gandhi still carried the innocence of Porbandar, the child who could not bear to see pain. The young man who believed the world, at its core, was kind. The softness in him was real, but it had not yet been tested. He arrived in South Africa at age 24, a young lawyer, freshly trained, hopeful, earnest. He believed that education, reason, and goodwill would be enough to resolve any disagreement. He believed that dignity could be explained and that people would listen. He did not yet know that the world does not always listen to those who whisper. The train to Pietermaritzburg, the moment that changed his life, began quietly. Cold evening, a railway station, a seat in the first-class compartment, a ticket he had paid for, and the weight of colonial eyes watching him. He had done nothing wrong, nothing but exist in a body the empire considered lesser. When the conductor demanded he move to third class, something in Gandhi's chest tightened, not in anger, but in disbelief. He explained, gently, logically, calmly, "I have a first-class ticket." But to them, logic was irrelevant. His dignity was irrelevant. To them, his skin was his seat. And so they drag him out. His suitcase hit the floor. His body hit the cold platform. The train pulled away in a long, hollow scream of steel. It was winter. The air cut like a blade. He stood alone in the freezing wind, holding nothing but his breath. Most men in that moment would burn with rage. They would curse the injustice, vow revenge, let anger become armor. But Gandhi did not burn. He shivered, not just from the cold, but from a realization that pierced deeper than humiliation. There are wounds that are not made by fists or guns. Wounds that live in systems, in habits, in the silent permission of millions. Violence was not merely physical. Violence was the belief that another human life is worth less. On that platform, in the dark, Gandhi did not think of retaliation. He thought of the structure of harm, the architecture of cruelty, and how it is built brick by brick from ordinary actions accepted as normal. He understood, suddenly, painfully, that the world could not be changed by demanding justice for oneself alone. The wound was not personal. The wound was human, a new kind of strength. In the silence of that night, as his breath formed small clouds in the cold air, he asked himself, what is the right response to injustice? Anger felt too easy, a fire that consumes everything, including the one who holds it. Violence felt like a mirror, reflecting cruelty back into the world, spreading the same wound from one body to another. No, the world did not need more pain. It needed healing. So Gandhi made a decision, a quiet one, but one that would echo across continents and centuries. He would resist oppression without becoming its echo. He would fight, but the battlefield would be within the human spirit. The birth of Satyagraha. He began to search for a way to oppose injustice without hatred. And there, in the meeting of old teachings and new wounds, a philosophy began to form. He called it Satyagraha, the holding firm to truth. Not truth as argument. Not truth as weapon. Truth as presence. Truth as being. It was a way of saying, I will not harm you, but I will also not obey you when you demand that I deny my dignity. This was not submission. This was not passivity. This was strength without violence. The strength of a mountain that does not strike, but also does not move. Understanding the deeper violence. Gandhi began to see that violence is not just physical. Violence is humiliation. Violence is exclusion. Violence is the quiet belief that some lives matter more than others. He wrote, "The worst violence is to make a man doubt that he is worthy of love." This realization shaped everything that followed. He saw that the true enemy was not the British Empire, not a political system, not even the men who pushed him from the train. The real enemy was the belief that power must express itself through dominance. This belief lived everywhere, in law, in institutions, in history, in the smallest gestures of everyday life. And so the solution could not be a revolution of force. It had to be a revolution of the spirit. The awakening. In South Africa, Gandhi was no longer simply the boy who feared violence. He became the man who understood it. He saw cruelty not as an expression of strength, but as a symptom of fear, fear of losing control, fear of the other, fear of one's own vulnerability. And so he chose something radical. He would respond to cruelty with dignity, to hatred with calm, to violence with a refusal to become violent in return. He was not trying to defeat his oppressors. He was trying to free them from the belief that they had to dominate others to matter. As the sun rose over Pietermaritzburg the next morning, Gandhi gathered his suitcase, stood up, and walked back toward the world, not hardened but transformed. The gentle child had grown, but had not disappeared. He had simply learned that tenderness could be courage, that softness could be rebellion, and that peace, when held with conviction, could be a weapon. The birth of Satyagraha. After the night at Pietermaritzburg, something in Gandhi had awakened, quietly but irrevocably. He had learned that violence was not merely the blow of a fist, not only the strike of a baton or the weight of boots on another's neck. Violence was older, deeper, woven into laws, customs, habits, silence. It was in the belief that some people deserved dignity and others did not. And if violence could live quietly, then so too could resistance. Not loud, not burning, not dripping with blood, but steady, unbroken, held in the heart. The search for a new path. In the months that followed, Gandhi did not plan rebellion. He listened. He observed. He walked the streets of South African towns where Indian laborers worked long hours for wages that barely fed them, where families lived in crowded quarters, where letters from home carried news of hunger and grief. He saw despair not as an emotion, but as a landscape. And slowly he understood. If the wound was internal, then the answer must be internal too. He began to search ancient texts, scriptures of Hinduism, Jainism, and Buddhism, words that had lived through centuries of suffering and renewal. He found a thread common to them all. Truth is not a concept. Truth is a force. Not something to argue. Not something to prove. Truth was something to live. Naming the philosophy. One evening, as community leaders gathered in a small hall, the air thick with frustration and quiet sorrow, Gandhi spoke, not with fire, but with clarity. "We must hold to truth," he said, firmly and without fear. He paused, not to create drama, but because truth deserves silence. "We must resist injustice," he continued, "but not with violence. Hatred only breeds more hatred." He looked into the tired faces around him, men and women who had been beaten by the world's indifference, and he spoke the word for the first time. Satyagraha. Satyagraha, he said, means holding to truth, not attacking, not surrendering, but standing so firmly in what is right that no force on earth can move us. The word did not echo like a battle cry. It settled, like a seed, and seeds, given time, break stone. The courage of stillness. There is a misunderstanding still whispered today that nonviolence is weakness, that to refuse to strike back is to bow. But Gandhi understood something deeper. It takes little strength to react. Anyone can shout when wounded. Anyone can strike when threatened. But to remain calm in the face of harm, to look into the eyes of hatred and not let it change your heart, that is strength. Nonviolence was not the absence of power. It was the mastery of it. Not softness, discipline. Not surrender, resolve. Not cowardice, courage so deep it does not need to roar. To fight without hating is to refuse to let the enemy choose your soul. Peace not as surrender, but as a shield. The world often imagines peace as fragile, a glass cup that shatters at the slightest blow. But Gandhi saw peace differently. Peace was a shield, one that cannot be cracked, because it is not made of stone or steel, but of principle. Weapons break, armies fall, empires crumble into sand and memory, but a human being who holds to truth cannot be conquered. They may be imprisoned, they may be beaten, they may even be killed, but they are never defeated. Because victory, to Gandhi, was not in triumph over another, but in remaining faithful to one's own humanity. He said, "In the midst of darkness, refuse to let your light go out." The world could injure his body, but only he could choose whether to let it injure his spirit, teaching the world to stand differently. Gandhi did not lecture. He lived what he believed. He listened before he spoke. He sat on the ground with those who suffered. He treated the poor not as an audience to be saved, but as equals whose dignity needed no justification. People began to follow him not because he promised victory, but because he offered meaning. He was not leading them into battle. He was leading them back to themselves. He showed them, you do not need to match violence with violence. You can interrupt the cycle. You can choose differently. You can say, "No, I will not return the harm you give, but I will also not allow you to deny my dignity." This was not submission. It was revolution, quiet, patient, relentless. The kind of revolution that changes the world not all at once, but breath by breath. A force without fire. Satyagraha was not a philosophy of the mind alone. It was a discipline of the heart. It required stillness in the face of storms. It required tenderness in a world built on domination. It required believing that another person, even one who harms, still carries a human soul buried under fear. And perhaps most difficult of all, it required love. Not love as affection. Not love as forgiveness. Love as recognition. The recognition that every life is made of the same fragile light. When Gandhi walked forward with nothing in his hands, and the world stepped back, it was not because he overpowered it. It was because he reminded it of what power truly is. The Salt March, when silence walked. There are revolutions shouted in the streets, fueled by fire, by urgency, by rage. But the Salt March was not one of those. It began with a whisper, a decision so small, so ordinary, that the empire did not fear it at first. Salt, just salt, the most common mineral, the taste of sweat, the memory of ocean on skin, the simplest ingredient of life. Under British rule, salt was taxed. Not gold, not silk, not jewels. Salt, the thing no human could live without, the thing shared by rich and poor alike. To control salt was to control the body itself. To say, your life is not your own, the quiet decision. When Gandhi announced he would break the salt law, he did not call for riots. He did not call for uprising. He did not call for force. He said, we will walk. Just that, walk. Not to conquer, not to overthrow, but to witness, to reveal, to stand in truth so clearly that everyone could see what had been hidden in plain sight. The road begins. On the morning of March 12, 1930, Gandhi stepped out of his ashram, holding no weapon, no banner, no shield, only a walking stick and the steady rhythm of his own breath. 78 men began with him, ordinary people, farmers, laborers, students, sons, fathers, no uniforms, no ranks, only footsteps, one after another, quiet, even, steady. They walked through villages where women carried water in brass pots, where children stared with wide, curious eyes, where elders pressed their palms together in silent blessing. And news began to spread like wind moving through wheat fields. They are walking. For salt. For dignity. For all of us. When footsteps become a tide. As the days passed, 78 became hundreds. Hundreds became thousands. Villagers joined. Travelers joined. The poor joined. The exhausted, the forgotten, the invisible all joined. They walked not in anger, but in clarity. Their silence was not empty. It was full. Full of presence. Full of meaning. full of the understanding that power does not always come from force. Sometimes, power comes from refusing to look away. This was not a march to prove strength. It was a march to prove humanity. A simple act becomes a revolution. After 24 days and 240 miles, Gandhi reached the Arabian Sea. The waves whispered on the shore like the breath of the world itself. He bent down, hand trembling with age, effort, and quiet resolve, and he picked up a handful of salt-crusted sand. He lifted it, small, ordinary, sacred, and said only, "With this, I shake the foundations of an empire." He did not scream. He did not boast. He simply named the truth, and the world heard it. Because this act, so gentle, was not about salt. It was about ownership of one's own life. It was about the right to exist without asking permission. The empire response. The British laughed at first. Salt? A handful of salt would not topple them. But then markets grew silent. Taxes went unpaid. Families began boiling seawater to make their own salt. Children hid tiny crystals in small cloth pouches like seeds of possibility. And the empire realized this was not a protest. This was awakening. So they responded the only way they knew how. They arrested him. And yet the march did not stop. The footsteps continued, without their leader, without orders, because the march was never truly led by one man. It was led by the idea that every human being has the right to stand, even quietly, even slowly, even with nothing but their breath. The power of walking slowly. The Salt March revealed something profound, that you do not need to run to change the world. You do not need to shout. You do not need to strike. You do not need to force. You only need to walk. Walk with intention. Walk with dignity. Walk with truth. Power is not speed. Power is not noise. Power is the ability to move forward without being moved off your path. The march was slow, not because they lacked urgency, but because they refused to let urgency steal their clarity. They chose to feel every step, to breathe every breath, to remember what they were walking for. Silence is strength. The world is often loud. Revolutions often roar. But the Salt March was quiet, like a tide, and tides reshape coastlines without ever needing to raise their voice. Gandhi showed that silence can be louder than shouting, that stillness can be stronger than force, that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the refusal to let conflict decide who we become. The Salt March did not end the British Empire. Not that day. Not that year. But it revealed a truth that could not be forgotten. An empire cannot rule a people who remember their own worth. And once a person stands, even gently, they cannot be made to kneel again. The cost of peace. Peace is often remembered as something gentle, as if it flows effortlessly like quiet water. But those who choose peace learn quickly that peace has a weight. Heaviness. Price. A loneliness few can imagine. For Gandhi, that price came in the form of cells, cold stone walls, iron bars, and silence so vast it could swallow thought itself. He was imprisoned many times, by different governors, different laws, different fears. But the cell was always the same. A simple mat, a tin plate, a small window, a silence that did not comfort, but demanded truth. Because in silence, there is nowhere to hide from oneself. The hunger strikes. When the British could not break his will, they sought to break his body. Gandhi responded not with violence, not with negotiation, but with hunger. He began to fast, not to punish others, but to purify intention. His hunger strikes were prayers made with the body itself. With each day of fasting, his bones grew sharp, his voice thinner. His hands shook like leaves in a weak breeze. Doctors warned that he would die. Followers begged him to stop. The world held its breath. He said only, "If my life is the price of peace, then peace is worth the price." But fasting was not martyrdom. It was discipline. The reclamation of power over the only territory a person ever truly owns, the self. Through hunger, he reminded the world, true power is not what you can force others to do. True power is what you can refuse to let yourself become. The loneliness of guiding millions. To lead many is not to walk in celebration. It is to walk alone. There were moments when the movement strained under its own weight. Moments when anger flared in the people he sought to liberate. Moments when violence erupted despite his pleas for calm. Gandhi saw blood on streets where he had hoped to place flowers. He saw homes burn the places he had prayed for unity. And in the privacy of his journal, he wrote words heavy with grief. Even peace can break the heart, because peace is not only the rejection of violence. It is the constant tending of the flame of empathy in a wind that never stops blowing. Thousands followed him. Millions listened to him. But only he carried the weight of being the symbol they depended on. And symbols do not get to rest. The struggle within. Most wars are fought with armies. Gandhi's war was fought inside the human heart. To resist the British was one struggle. To resist hatred toward the British was another entirely. He understood something terrifying. If peace was to survive, it must live in the heart even when the world gave every reason to abandon it. So he guarded his heart with the vigilance of a sentry at a gate. Every emotion examined. Every anger questioned. Every bitterness dissolved before it could take root. This was work no one could see. The hardest work of all. The public figure and the private man. To the world, Gandhi was the Mahatma, the great soul. A beacon. A symbol of moral clarity. But in his letters to friends, he wrote of doubt, of sorrow, of nights when his spirit trembled. He was not made of stone. He was not beyond pain. He was simply a man who refused to let pain decide his direction. He once wrote, "I am weak. I am afraid. But I will not let fear be my master." This was his true strength, not certainty, but devotion. He woke each morning and chose peace again, and again, and again, even when peace felt impossible. Even when peace broke his heart. The paradox of peace. What Gandhi came to understand was this. Peace is not soft. Peace is not easy. Peace is not the absence of storms. Peace is the courage to stand in the storm without becoming it. Peace demands sacrifice. Sacrifice of comfort. Sacrifice of certainty. Sacrifice of the desire to strike back. Peace is carrying the wound without passing it forward. Peace is the hardest path any human can choose. And that is why so few choose it. The quiet truth. In the final years of his struggle, Gandhi grew thinner, quieter, sadder perhaps, but also clearer than ever. He understood that peace was not merely a strategy, not merely a philosophy, not merely resistance. Peace was a form of love. Not love as affection, not love as forgiveness. Love as recognition of our shared fragility. Love as the refusal to harm another soul, no matter how deeply one has been harmed. This was his most radical belief, that the world could be healed not by conquering wounds, but by refusing to create new ones. And in that silence, he held the world. Independence and the fracture of the dream. India was finally free. After decades of marches, prisons, hunger strikes, and unwavering patience, the empire loosened its grip. The British lowered their flag. A new nation raised its own. Crowds danced in the streets. Children ran barefoot, waving cloth flags in the dust. Women cried tears of joy. Songs rose like incense into the night air. But Gandhi, the man who had been the heart of the movement, was not there to celebrate. He was walking alone on a quiet road hundreds of miles away. Because freedom had come with a wound. A nation divided. India did not win independence as one. She was split, divided into two countries, India and Pakistan. A border was drawn on maps by rulers who did not know the land, nor the hearts that beat upon it. Hindus on one side, Muslims on the other. Communities that had lived beside each other for centuries, shared markets, rivers, songs, festivals, were now strangers, suddenly enemies. Rumors spread like wildfire. Fear became fuel. Houses burned. Caravans of refugees stretched from horizon to horizon, miles and miles of weary footsteps, carrying what little life had survived. Parents searching for missing children. Villages emptied. Rivers reddened. The dream Gandhi carried of unity, of brotherhood, was tearing in front of him. The deepest wound. The British had been the adversary. It is easy to resist an oppressor. The enemy is outside. The battle is clear. But now the enemy was within. Neighbor against neighbor. Friend against friend. Brother against brother. This pain was deeper than any prison cell. Gandhi once said, "Freedom without harmony is a body without a soul." Now he watched as that body bled. People who had chanted his name burned each other's homes. People who had once marched behind him shouted hatred in the streets. And Gandhi, the Mahatma, found himself powerless to stop the flood of suffering that came not from empire but from human fear. He walks toward the fire. While others celebrated independence, Gandhi walked directly into the riots. No guards, no weapons, just his staff, his sandals, and his voice. He stepped into neighborhoods where smoke rose from blackened doorways, where mothers wailed, where men shouted for revenge. He did not lecture. He did not condemn. He simply stood among them and said, "What you do to them, you do to me." And the shouting would quiet. Not always for long, but long enough for tears to rise where fire had been. The fast for India's soul. When words were no longer enough, he turned again to the only weapon he believed in. His body. He declared a fast, not against the British, not against the government, but against hatred itself. He said, "I cannot celebrate freedom while my people destroy each other. I will not eat until the violence ends." His body, already fragile with age, began to wither. Thousands gathered outside his room, Hindus and Muslims alike, watching the slow fade of the man who had carried their hope. They argued, they accused, they wept, until finally one night, a group of leaders from both sides entered his room. They fell to their knees and said, "We will stop. We will protect one another. We will choose peace." Only then did Gandhi allow himself to drink a single sip of juice. The relief was gentle, not triumphant. Peace had been bought again, but at a cost. Victory without joy. The newspapers printed headlines of glory. Parades marched. Flags waved. But Gandhi remained quiet, for he knew freedom from empire was only the beginning. The harder struggle, the struggle within the human heart, still continued. He once wrote during these final months, "The world thinks we have one, but I feel only sorrow. I wanted freedom for all. What we have is fragments. This is the tragedy of great dreams. Sometimes they break not under the strength of enemies, but under the weight of the very people who believed in them." A quiet evening. In the final days of his life, Gandhi no longer led marches, no longer commanded crowds. He sat on woven mats, prayed, listened, and held the hands of those who came to him weeping, asking, "Why? Why do we hurt each other?" He would answer softly, "Because peace is the hardest journey, and we are just learning to walk. No bitterness, no anger, just sorrow, like a river that had run too long." Peace is not always triumphant. History often tells the story of victory as if it ends in celebration. But Gandhi's story reminds us, peace does not always end in triumph. Sometimes peace ends in exhaustion, in heartbreak, in sacrifice without applause. Sometimes peace means walking alone into places where the world is breaking and offering your small, steady voice, even when you know it may not be enough. Gandhi did not seek to win. He sought to heal. And healing, as the world learned, is the hardest work a human being can do. His dream was wounded. His heart was heavy. But he kept walking. Because sometimes, even when the dream is shattered, the journey must continue. The final prayer. Gandhi was tired. Not the tiredness that sleep could cure, but the deep weariness that settles into the bones of someone who has carried the weight of millions. He had spent his life walking, speaking softly where others shouted, lifting hope where others lifted weapons, reminding the world that peace is not weakness. It is the greatest strength a human heart can hold. But now, in the final winter of his life, he felt the fractures of the dream he had nurtured like a fragile flame. India was free, yes, but divided, scarred, trembling. Communities he had once watched share meals and festivals now eyed each other with suspicion and grief. And so Gandhi did what he always did in moments of darkness. He fasted. Prayer made of hunger. His fast had always been more than protests. They were prayers, spoken not from the lips, but from the body itself. He believed that the body could serve as a candle, burning slowly to illuminate the conscience of a nation. And now, as riots continue to flicker across the land, he let himself grow small again, a quiet signal to a world drowning in noise. People begged him to stop. Doctors warned him his heart was failing. But he answered, "If my body must break for my people to remember compassion, let it break." His voice was soft, but it carried the weight of oceans. The evening of January 30th, 1948. On his final day, Gandhi prepared to attend his evening prayer meeting. He walked slowly, his body thin, draped in simple white cloth. Two young women supported him by the arms, not because he was weak of spirit, but because peace had been carved into his bones. The garden was quiet except for murmurs of devotion. People bowed as he approached, as they always had. Among them stood a man whose heart had hardened. Not a foreign soldier, not a colonial officer, but an Indian, someone Gandhi had prayed for, fought for, loved as part of his own nation. Violence does not always come from the outside. Sometimes it rises from grief, sometimes from fear, sometimes from misunderstanding, sometimes from a belief that peace is too slow. The shot that silenced the body. As Gandhi pressed his palms together to greet those gathered, the man stepped forward. 3 gunshots, sharp, final, breaking the quiet like shattered glass. Gandhi fell, his last words soft, almost carried by breath alone. Hey, Ram. God, not hatred, not anger, not fear. Prayer. Even in death, he refused to hate. The world stops. News traveled like wind across continents. In cities and villages, from London to Lahore, from mountain temples to crowded ports, people wept in silence. Not only those who agreed with him, not only those who followed him. Even those who opposed him felt the world shift. It is one thing to face a man who fights. It is another to face a man who loves louder than war. A body returns to ash. A voice remains. Gandhi's body was cremated by the river. The flames rose slowly, like a whisper returning to the sky. But something stayed. Not on banners, not in books, not in monuments, but in the quiet decisions of millions of ordinary hearts. The moment someone breathes before speaking. The moment someone chooses patience instead of anger. The moment someone decides that another human life is not theirs to harm. That is where Gandhi lives. Peace does not end with the passing of the peaceful. Even when the body falls, the echo remains. He taught us that strength is not in the fist, but in the open hand. That courage is not in shouting, but in the willingness to stand in silence when the world demands noise. He showed us that hatred is learned, but compassion is remembered. Because what Gandhi left behind was not an ideology, nor a nation, nor a victory. He left a way of breathing, a way of seeing the world as something worth healing. A reminder that peace is not the end of the journey. Peace is the path. What Gandhi left for us. Gandhi did not leave us a blueprint for power. He did not design systems or claim to own the truth. What he left was something smaller, quieter, more enduring. A seed, a way of being, a reminder that peace is not the dream of the weak, it is the courage of the deeply human. Nonviolence was never meant to be silence. It was never surrender. It was the choice to love in a world that fears love. It was the choice to say, I will not become what hurts me. And perhaps this is the revolution we are still learning. Not the revolution of nations, but the revolution of the heart. The one that happens quietly, in the space between anger and response, between fear and compassion, between impulse and understanding. Peace does not fall from governments. Peace begins the moment one person chooses gentleness where cruelty would have been easier. So tonight, as the world outside continues its storms, you may rest knowing this. Peace is still possible. Not as a grand event, but as a choice made breath by breath, step by step, day by day. A seed planted again and again in the soil of our shared humanity.